So we're going to start recording. I do want to I know everybody has been here for a few minutes, but if you haven't taken the time, click through on the land acknowledgement and find out what land you are on and put that in the chat section. That would be great. And as we get started, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see me here. Can you see me? Excellent. I just wanted to take a second and do some housekeeping things. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Jessica Kurtz-Picorni. I work for the SCA. I'm the Senior Officer of Major Gifts for the Western region, and I'm so happy that you are here today. I just wanted to quickly go over a couple things before we get started. First, we're gonna do our best to keep everybody on mute, but please ensure that you are on mute right now. So that way we can hear the speakers when they come on. And also, we did turn off everyone's camera when they entered. This was to ensure that you'll be able to see Natalie and Stephanie when they're speaking. So if you want to turn your camera back off, so that way they're the ones that appear in your screen, or somewhere up here in the top corner, right corner, whichever side that is for you, there is something that says speaker view or gallery view. And if you click on that, you'll want to go ahead and make sure that you're in speaker view, and that's going to highlight the person who is talking. So just want to give that little moment. Also, I wanted to just acknowledge really quick, there have been a couple things this week that have happened, and I just want to recognize the passing of RBG and the injustice around Breonna Taylor. And I just wanted to take a brief moment of silence for both of those things this week. So if you'll join me in that. Thank you so much for joining me. Lastly, if you have any questions during the call, there's a chat feature down here at the bottom. Go ahead and submit your questions on that chat feature, and we will try and get to them at the very end. So thank you so much for being here, and I want to go ahead and get started by introducing your speakers. So let me share my screen so you can see them. All right. So I want to introduce Stephanie Meeks. Stephanie has served in senior executive roles in leading national and international conservation and preservation organizations. She joined SCA as the CEO and president in May 2020. From 2010 to 2018, she served as president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the United States' leading nonprofit dedicated to cultural resource protection. Prior to the National Trust, she served as president and CEO of Counterpart International, a global development organization working in 30+ countries. From 1990 to 2008, she held several senior positions, including interim president and chief operating officer with the Nature Conservancy, a global conservation organization active in all 50 states around the world. And Natalie Mebane served with SCA as an intern at the Devil's Postpile National Monument in 2007. Since then, she has gone on to be a sustainable policy advocate with proven leadership and strategic planning experience. She is currently the Associate Director of United States Policy at 350.org, where she manages the US policy team in charge of all C3 advocacy and C4 electoral work. She has lobbied members of Congress to promote clean energy and environmental legislation and to stop the expansion of fossil fuel development and infrastructure. She's also working to pass a Green New Deal and build grassroots support for a transition away from fossil fuels. Additionally, she serves on the board of PowerShift Network and as the Adult Director of Advocacy and Fundraising for 0 Hour. So just wanted to say a big welcome and thank you to both Stephanie and Natalie for being here today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Natalie. Natalie, you want to take it away?
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for SCA for having me here today. So yes, I'm Natalie Mebane. I am the policy director at 350.org and a former SCA intern in 2007. I had a great time living in the Sierra Nevada woods, Sierra Nevada forest for 3 months in the summer of 2007. And it definitely changed my life. I love outdoor spaces. Right now, as you can see, I'm in the Muir Woods. It's my favorite place, which is my favorite forest. So I've always loved to be in the Muir Woods. And so, yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. And, of course, asking for Stephanie. I know you are recently past your 100-day milestone here at SCA. And we wanted to ask, what have you put in place or accomplished to date in your first 100 days?
Well, hi, Natalie, and hello, everybody. It's great to see you, although I do wish I could see your faces. Working remotely, I find I thrive on these big Zoom calls. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to have you with us. And Natalie, thanks so much for being with us. I'm glad you told me where Devil's Push Pile is, because I wasn't sure I knew where that national monument was. So now I know it's in the Sierra Nevadas. It sounds like a wonderful place. Yeah, so I joined SCA at a really extraordinary time, right in the middle of the height of the first wave of the pandemic. I can tell you that I have only met 2 of my colleagues in person in the Arlington office, because everyone has been working remotely since I joined. But nevertheless, we have worked really hard to get to know one another over the summer using mechanisms like Zoom, and really spending as much time together as we can, also with our folks in the field. I thought I would start maybe first, Natalie, by talking a little bit about what the board has asked me to do in coming into SCA, and then I can talk a little bit about my first 100 days with the organization. So I joined SCA in its 64th year, a remarkable organization with such a storied past, as so many of you know, but also an organization experiencing a season like it has never experienced before because of COVID. But against all that backdrop, the board has asked me to focus, at least initially, on 3 overarching things. The first is to think about how we continue to deliver excellent programs, but also how to evolve those programs. The board recognizes that a lot has changed since Liz Putnam established the organization in 1957. For many decades, SCA was the only game in town, but today there are something like 132 conservation corps active in the United States. It is a great testament to Liz that she sparked an entire movement, but it also presents, sort of some interesting questions for SCA about what role we continue to play moving forward. So that's one question, recognizing where we are, where do we want to go in the future. The second area that they've asked me to look at, and I would say all 3 of these things are very much interwoven, as you'll see, is to bring more attention to SCA's values around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in our conversation, but the SCA and the board and the staff, like many of our conservation peers, recognize that we have been lagging in this area and we want to do better. I explained to the board when I was interviewing for the role some of the work that we did at the National Trust, also to internalize our work around Jedi, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we want to follow a similar path here at SCA. And then the third thing that the board has asked me to work on is continuing to strengthen the financial footing and operations of SCA. Like many nonprofits, and especially because we are in an environment of increased competition, SCA needs to continue to think about how to expand and diversify its funding base. And so we've already done, some work in that area, and we think there are a lot more opportunities, and I'm happy to talk about that. So that, and sort of the broadest brushstrokes, that's what the board has asked me to focus on. And I think it's a really good mandate in terms of what I'm learning about the organization. So what we've done over the first couple of months here, it's been almost 4 months now that I've been on board, is to start to take these ideas and shape them into a strategic plan. I use a template that I've used for about 25 years now that's called the one-page strategic plan. Literally forces everybody to get on the same one page, and forces some really important conversations about what success means for the organization, what our highest priorities are, and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. So we've put together a first draft of that plan. It includes a number of milestones for this year that represent some of the most significant work that was already underway for the organization, and some really important projects that the organization wanted to get started with. So we've done a lot of planning this summer. Within the last month, we've really started moving into implementation, and I'd be happy to tell you more about that as the conversation unfolds.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And, you know, with climate change becoming more and more urgent, and what kind of role will you say SCA is going to be taking into address climate change? So how do you see SCA taking on climate change and addressing it?
Yeah, so I just talked about our strategic plan and some of the projects that we have underway for this year. And scoping out climate change and where SCA could make a distinctive contribution is one of those things currently underway. So I don't have the answer yet to that question, but we know that climate change is important and increasingly important. We know that it's a very high interest to the demographics that we serve. The young people who participate in our programs want to be climate ambassadors and figure out how they can be more engaged in climate change. And we've started exploring, different kinds of conservation work, Natalie, that we might be able to do, lean into, like reforestation, public gardens, things like that, that could help contribute to climate change or to mitigating the effects of climate change. So we don't quite know yet. And for any of you who are experts in the climate field, we'd love to know that so that we could tap into your brains over the course of the next several months while we figure this out.
So up next, we're going to do a poll. So recently, Congress has passed and it's become law, the Great American Outdoors Act. So we're going to do a poll, and the poll question is, have you heard about the Great American Outdoors Act, yes or no? So go ahead and fill in the poll, and we'll just give it about a minute or so for folks to fill in. So as we're waiting for some of the results to come in from the poll, I'll ask you, Stephanie, how will this law, the Great American Outdoors Act, impact public lands and SCA?
Yeah, well, so this is a pretty exciting accomplishment to come out of the current Congress, the Great American Outdoors Act. It provides $9 billion in funding for deferred maintenance on public lands. This was actually a bill we were working on also when I was at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and there was a whole coalition of people, including SCA, the Pew Charitable Trust, the National Parks Conservation Association, and others who were working on advocating for this legislation. And I was just thrilled to see it enacted. So the most recent estimates that I've heard is that the Park Service alone has something approaching $18 billion in deferred maintenance for roads, buildings, trails, and other infrastructure at national parks. So this bill doesn't address all of that, but it goes a long way towards it, at about half of what the national parks need anyway. But this isn't limited to just national parks. It also will affect other land owning agencies of the federal government. The opportunity that I think it provides for SCA, it also provides for other corps, which is that there will be an infusion of money for the kind of work that we do over the next 5 years. That's $9 billion over the next 5 years. So that's very exciting. Our early discussions with some of the managers in these different federal agencies indicates that in the first year, the funding is likely to go to some of the biggest infrastructure projects like roads and buildings, things that are not necessarily suited to conservation corps or the work of SCA. I'm not saying that that's an exclusive statement, but that seems to be directionally where some of the agencies are headed. But we're in conversation with them about what kinds of projects they might have that would be appropriate for SCA in this coming year, and then certainly in years 2 through 5. So we're really excited about it. And I guess, Natalie, the opportunity here is for some of SCA's traditional programs to continue to shine and thrive.
And what are you excited about for the future of SCA?
That question makes me think of a conversation I had with Liz Putnam in the first week that I was at SCA, our founder, who still participates in SCA board meetings as an ex officio member and is sort of everybody's moral compass when it comes to thinking about our work every day at SCA. She's really a wonderful person. And she said something to me that I thought was just right. She said, if you open your eyes wide enough, all you'll see is opportunity. And I have to say, that's what I feel when I come to work every day at SCA. There's so much opportunity for us on so many different fronts. So I'm excited about climate change, absolutely. That sounds funny. I'm excited about SCA engaging in climate change. I should say it that way. We also have a significant depth of knowledge in the area of social and emotional development. And we've been giving a lot of thought, and will continue to give a lot of thought to that this year, and how we further imbue our programs with leadership development opportunities using social emotional development as a centerpiece. So those are a couple of things that I'm really excited about for this year.
Excellent. And I too am excited to fight climate change as well, but not for climate change. And I'm happy that SCA is taking on climate change. I think that's excellent, since of course it affects all of the places that SCA works as well. And so going into, we oftentimes use this acronym Jedi, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This is a phrase, an acronym that's being used a lot, especially in nonprofit spaces recently. How do you see Jedi values being incorporated into the work of SCA going forward?
Yeah, I like the way you asked that question, Natalie, because I think that the question actually answers itself when you think about it that way. And that is that it needs to be embedded in the work of SCA. I might just reflect for a moment back on my prior role with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where we similarly were wrestling with how do we bring these values that we hold dear and that we all believe in, really bring them to the fore of our work. And it wasn't until we actually embedded the values in the work itself that the tide started to change for that organization. And I suspect the same thing will be true at SCA. So we're doing all the things that one might expect. We're focusing on ourselves first in terms of training and making sure that we are as adept and nuanced about Jedi as we can be in our current roles. We're thinking about how we can do a better job of bringing an even more diverse constituency into the fold, both on our board, on our staff, and also in our program participants. And increasingly, I think we will do more of what you asked, which is how will we bring it into the program itself. And there are a couple of different ways I think we can do that, at least at this early stage. I would say these are my ideas. And one of those is through our urban community programs. The Student Conservation Association has been working in cities for 7 or so years. We're well established in a number of American cities. And that really puts us in closer touch with more diverse communities than some of our backcountry work does. And we see a lot of opportunities to potentially expand that work. But speaking of the backcountry itself, one of the concerns and challenges that our current members are faced with, especially our diverse members, is how safe they feel being in the backcountry as a person of color. And that's a problem that SCA can't solve alone, because that really starts to get to the larger social issues, social justice issues that our country is dealing with. But we know that by focusing on that issue and by working with our partners, we can be vigilant about trying to make our work spaces and engagements as comfortable and as safe as they can be. So I would say we're in the very early days of answering that question, Natalie, and I'd love to do this again in a year or two's time so that we can talk about this again and hopefully talk about some of the progress we've made.
Excellent. And, how has Jedi work, in terms of your opinion, been missing from outdoor spaces? How has it not been showing up? And also, what effect does that have on people who want to access these spaces when this Jedi work is missing?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. We have a woman named Mamie Parker, Dr. Mamie Parker, who's the vice chair of our board and the chair-elect. And she did a call yesterday with our Jedi working group for the staff. And she talked about, as a young woman, going to parks, national parks, wildlife refuges, and other places, and people asking her if she was lost. She happens to be an African-American woman, and if they could help with directions. She was, at the time, a regional director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And, the air just kind of goes out of you when you hear stories like that. So even well-meaning people, I think, who are offering to give directions, unintentionally send the wrong signal about whether somebody is welcome or expected in our national parks and our national refuges. So with all things related to Jedi, I think the answer first starts with awareness about each one of us kind of owning some responsibility for making places safe. And that means all of us on this call and all of our partners in land agencies, other conservation organizations, of course, and beyond. Because it isn't until people feel welcome and comfortable that they're going to truly believe that these lands are for them as much as they're meant to be for all of us.
That's interesting that you mentioned that story. I have a friend of mine, a former colleague who is, also a Black woman, and she was invited to speak at a chapter event for the org that she works for. And she was the speaker. She was the speaker they were waiting for. And she walks into the room, the office room where everybody's waiting, and they saw her and they were confused, and they were like, "Hi, like, do you need some help? Are you looking for something? Like, what do you, same type of confusion." Yeah. And she was like, "This is the citizenship space, right?" Like, she confirmed that she in fact was in the right spot. And they're like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Okay, well, I'm, so-and-so, the person who's supposed to be speaking tonight as the guest speaker." And they were kind of like, "Oh, you're the guest speaker?" And it's like, yes, I am. You invited me. And it was just very awkward because it was the same thing of like, "Hi, why are you here?" Type of answer question. And it's just, it's shocking when that even happens, where it's like even the person who is supposed to be the keynote, the person that you're hoping shows up, and her immediate, sort of almost unintentional, but still obviously very hurtful welcome was a sort of like, "What are you doing here in this space?" And so that just reminds me of it, that is actually common different places.
Doesn't make it any better, but I can tell you that that's happened to me too, as a woman showing up as a speaker from time to time. If you don't fit the picture, sometimes people don't know what to think.
They're kind of surprised that you're there. Absolutely. And we're going to do another poll. So this is a poll related to COVID-19. So the poll is going to be, how has COVID-19 affected the work that you do? Or has COVID-19 affected the work that you do? So this is yes or no. So the poll should be popping up now. And there's a few other questions on the poll too. All right. So a question to you, of course, Stephanie, is how has COVID-19 impacted SCA's programming?
Well, it has, of course, just like it's impacted everything else. But I just want to do a big salute to all my colleagues who are on the phone with us today and all the ones who couldn't join us. This organization has really rallied. And I'll give you the punchline first, which is that we're fielding about half the number of people this year that we would field in a normal year. And while it's only half, it feels like a great accomplishment because it has been such a challenging year. We really weren't able to start our field season until July. And as all of you who are alums know, that's late for us because we normally get started earlier in the spring. But there was a lot of confusion about COVID, about the impact on national parks, whether parks and other areas would be open. That only started to clear up late in June and into early July. Our team, of all the organizations that are trying to navigate through this COVID environment, I think SCA was in a way particularly well positioned because we are accustomed to training our participants and have such a focus on safety. Our group was really able to rally quite adeptly to think about the impacts of COVID and how we would implement safety measures to keep our staff and our participants and our partners all safe. So we have been in the field a little bit since the spring and in fuller force since the middle of July. And things are going quite well. So I would say that was one impact. The second impact speaks a little bit to how we've had to adapt, as many schools have, to more of a hybrid environment. And I want to thank our partners who are on the call today too, because they have been really terrific to work with and very flexible in thinking through different ways to engage our program participants who are so looking forward to their SCA experience this summer. So we have, for example, some interns who are doing their internships almost completely remotely or sometimes completely remotely. We've been bringing in virtual aspects to our traditional crews and corps so that some of the training and team building, for example, is happening online. It's opened up a whole new world for us, Natalie, and we actually are starting to have conversations about whether there are some elements to this adapted programming that might make sense for us to continue into the future.
And how would you say that SCA has been able to adapt, considering coronavirus, to reach students who, now can't physically join a crew?
Yeah, well, so some of it has been, this hybrid model, which I've talked about a little bit, but it's given us an opportunity to really engage anyone who has access, to the internet, and it's one of the ways that one of the things that I think we want to hold on to, because we want to make sure that SCA provides opportunities for people, even if they're not perhaps as physically abled as some of our programs have traditionally demanded. But this virtual programming has given us the opportunity, to provide opportunities like more guest speakers who are able to jump on the phone and participate in programming. I was delighted to participate in a session with our Excelsior Corps and Hudson Valley crews, for example, talking a little bit about my own career. We learned about sort of the wide array of professional development opportunities that are available through applications like Coursera and are bringing more of that training into our own programs. We've been investigating projects that can be done virtually, like citizen science work, for example, sending people out with iIdentify and identifying different species and then logging that in at home. So there's really been a kind of a whole new way of adapting. And again, I think the team at SCA who's responsible for all this gets a lot of credit because it was crunch time there in the spring to figure out how to adapt programming into this virtual hybrid model.
So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jessica, who's going to go over some questions that were submitted.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie and Stephanie. That was great. We are not done yet. We have questions that were submitted as folks registered for the event. But if people on the call have other questions, feel free to put those in the chat box down here at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try and get to some questions. We have about 10 minutes left. So I just want to try and get to some questions here. So Stephanie, I would say this one is more for you. In order to survive, most nonprofits are working to diversify their funding base. What is your strategy?
Yeah, so I mentioned at the top of the call that that's one of the things the board has asked me to focus on. SCA today gets about 70% of its revenue from federal, state, or local government projects that we work on, and about 30% comes from philanthropic support. So one of the things that we're working to do is to expand our base of philanthropic support. And I would just like to say at this very moment that everybody on this call has an opportunity to help us do that. And especially our great alumni. We hope that you will consider including SCA in your philanthropic plans for the year and for going forward. But we see opportunities also, Jessica, to expand. And we're looking at things like workforce development. Given the rise in unemployment, for example, we know that many states and cities are prioritizing workforce development programs, and we think that there could be an opportunity there for SCA. We're exploring ways that we might work additionally with schools using sources like Title I funding that we think could be a real win-win for bringing more SCA programming into some of the urban communities that we talked about earlier. So we will continue to expand, our government sources as well as our philanthropic sources, and we do believe that there's a lot of opportunity for us out there.
Great, thank you so much. Another question that was submitted when folks registered, and I think Natalie and Stephanie, both of you could answer this and sort of already have, but how can we inspire more conservation action in everyday people?
Natalie, do you want to go first?
I would say the first thing is to, I guess, remind people of the outdoors. I think everybody in their heart is a conservationist. I think the issue is that we are often in cities where we don't see the stars at night. We don't see the redwoods. We don't see the nature that's always been around us. So I think the best way to remind people and to kind of spur that love is to really inspire people to go to the outdoors when they can. I think that whenever you see a new space, a new park. I was in Joshua Tree 2 years ago, right after the election. I was in California for a campaign and decided to stay on for another week or two, just wandering California, just drove the Joshua Tree and climbed the mountain and just went on a trip by myself. And, just climbing a mountain by yourself in the middle of Joshua Tree, seeing nothing but wilderness and desert for miles in front of you. I think the best way to inspire people is to try to push them to get outside, even if it's not that far. Like this Saturday, I plan on going to a state park in Maryland. Started looking up state parks and waterfalls. And I mean, we have to be very creative right now because obviously with coronavirus, you're not exactly going to go to that wine festival that you were going to go to, or maybe the 2 or 3 that you normally hit in the summer that are now canceled that you're sad about. So you have to go to other things. And so you're like, well, how do I still enjoy this weather, enjoy the summer, enjoy this time in a way that still works for the situation that we're in right now? And for me, I found that I've now been purposely looking for parks constantly. And every week I'm like, all right, where's a new place I need to explore? And so even if you're not taking a giant trip off to the desert in Joshua Tree, just remembering that you can look up what is near you and enjoying that outdoor space, even if it's just an hour-long hike, because that will keep spurring the conservation in your spirit.
Thank you.
That's great, Natalie. And you know, that is inspiring. I think one of the kind of perverse positives that is coming out of COVID is people remembering how much they care about green space and how much they value the opportunity to get outdoors. And sort of similarly, Jessica, I was thinking, you know, the people that have most influenced me in my life are people who have just set a powerful example by the way they live their life. And so doing things like Natalie is describing, working in the field of conservation. I mean, that's why I'm here, because I think this is, SCA is a powerful way to broaden the adoption of conservation values and getting more people engaged in our work. And we obviously all play a role in that. And the 90,000 alumni of SCA are really a powerful force in that regard too. You know, I'm trying to be more intentional about posting about things about the environment that I care about, whether they're environmental challenges or solutions, talking to my friends about conservation issues and opportunities, and just using my platform, whether it's my personal platform or my professional platform, to draw attention to the issue. And I think we all just need to look for opportunities in our own lives and figure out what is our platform and how can we take advantage of it.
That's great. Thank you both. We do have a couple questions that popped up in the chat. There's kind of a follow-up to what you both were just speaking about. Christine asked, how do we keep conservation present in people's minds in such an easily distracted, technology-obsessed society? I don't know if you want to take on that one or not, but just curious.
I would just say the best way is, you know, as you mentioned, the same thing, as a strange result of coronavirus, we've had a lot of distractions removed. You know, normally in the summertime, people are thinking about, you know, what movie they're going to see, and just all these things that were very normal to us and that we obviously still miss. I think that it's sort of that time that folks have been sort of forced to center on things that are nearby that they love, and to remember things that they can still do. So I would say the best way is just, and I think it's something that people have to do personally. I don't think it's something that we can necessarily push other people to do. But even if you're working all day, Monday through Friday, if that's your schedule and you're working 10, 12-hour days, however your schedule is, so, push some time aside on the weekend that you're gonna, even if it's your local park. I have a local park by me called Brookside Gardens. It's just a 10-minute drive, and it has roses and it has trees and and it's always been there. It's been there since before I was born, but I never realized how important it was to me until now. Now that is my activity. It's like, oh, gotta get away, gotta get Brookside, you know? And I think that sort of just reminding people that nothing is wrong with technology. But if it's the only thing in your life, you're not gonna realize how much you miss just being outside until that is your release is going outside. So just making sure you get to your local park, and then if you are able to take a big trip to a big park, I mean, even better. But just kind of putting aside time in your week, every week, to commune outside.
I think that's beautiful. I'm going to let that stand.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that I will say, Natalie, for those of us on the West Coast, I think your answer rings really close to home, since we weren't able to go outside for a week and a half. It's like, oh, yeah, I watch a lot of TV. I should, you know, I'm missing going outside. So it definitely rings true for me. Another question that popped up in the chat, Deanne Adams. I know Deanne. Hi, Deanne. How does SCA coordinate and or compete with local and state youth corps efforts? Are you able to answer that, or I'm happy to follow up as well?
Yeah, let me start, Jessica, and certainly happy to have you expand on it. So, you know, I mentioned in the beginning that SCA does compete in a sense. We think of other conservation corps as certainly partners in the cause, but when it comes down to funding, we are often competing. And I remember seeing this as an advanced question, and Deanne said, one year I saw SCA working in this park near our home, and the next year I saw another crew or another organization, and that is often just the way it works. we have a whole team of people that is filling out applications all the time for different opportunities that are put forth by the Park Service, the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, certain state organizations, etc. So I'll speak to the competition part. And Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about the cooperation side?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I think I might follow up with Deanne. Deanne is in Alaska, so I might follow up with her separately and connect her with Zach, who is our partnership director up there. Because I know in the comments she had a specific question around Alaska. So I'll connect with her separately on some of those answers. I do have there's another question from Christine in the comments here. She wants to know, where does SCA stand on the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, well, we stand with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Done. So, and some questions that were submitted, we're just going to do a couple more here. There's one for Stephanie. As former president and CEO of the National Trust of Historic Preservation, will you focus on expanding SCA service opportunities in historic preservation?
Well, one of the things I did when I was at the National Trust is start a preservation corps that's called Hope Crew. It stands for Hands-on Preservation Experience. So I had a little bit of a hand in that, and that program continues to this day. I love historic preservation as much as I love conservation. You know, the way I think of it, it's all the world we live in, and preservation speaks to my conservation values also, because I think it's really important to reuse and recycle and restore buildings as much as it is to care for the natural world. The Great American Outdoors Act will certainly provide some opportunities for historic preservation, in addition to trail building and natural resource conservation activities, which are a larger part of what SCA does. I would say that I would be delighted to see our historic preservation, aspects of our historic preservation program grow. And I think in the short term, that could very much be the case. I don't know, though, if that's a long-term growth trajectory for SCA. I see it as being part of our portfolio projects, but I don't know that that will be a big driver of growth.
We had somebody who's a former employee in the chat ask what our plans are for the New Hampshire campus. Do you have any thoughts there? Well, too soon?
It's a little bit too soon, but I would say that I think this whole Zoom experience has made me as a leader really rethink real estate in general. I would tell you that prior to this, I was a real advocate for getting everybody together in one place. And I do believe that there is great opportunity for kind of those casual collisions, they call them, being in the hallway and saying, hey, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. And I miss that in my day-to-day life. But I think what we've learned in the last couple of months is that we can really function quite well in a different environment and in a distributed environment, and that there are some advantages to this. It really reduces the cost and the environmental impacts and the stress of commuting for a lot of our staff. For people who are caretakers of children or adults in their lives, they have more flexibility. So there are some things I think we really need to think through about all of our offices, including the New Hampshire office, and whether we need to have the same kind of real estate footprint going forward that we've had in the past, or whether we could redeploy some of those resources in ways that might bring us together in an even more dynamic setting, a couple of times a year. So I have been sort of excited thinking about that, but haven't gotten very far in talking about it with anybody else. So I should probably stop.
That's great, thank you. Well, I think we're just about on the West Coast 9:50, for East Coast 12:50. So I think we're going to wrap it up. And if people had other questions, I'm going to share my contact info right now, so they can have that. Let's see here. Share this. Are you able to see my
Not yet.
Bring in-
And while Jessica's pulling that up, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Really is a lot of fun, and I look forward to the day when I get to see all of you in person. And Natalie, I wanted to thank you. I think you have another career ahead of you as with your own talk show. You're really good at asking questions, so thank you very much.
I do have a podcast that I might as well plug.
Please.
So if anybody is interested in see it, it's called, I'm putting in the chat right now. It's called Our Future Now. And so feel free to search it. Just type in Our Future Now, and on any podcast search, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and you'll find it and subscribe. And so, yeah, it's kind of like a political / environmental activist type ish podcast. I have a co-host, Jonah Gottlieb, as well. So thank you for the plug on there. I appreciate it.
We'll check it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to Natalie and Stephanie, and also thank you for everybody that is joining us today. It is the tail end of Alumni Engagement Week, and tomorrow we're going to celebrate National Public Lands Day. Allie is going to put a link in the chats, so please check out the virtual events that are going to be happening there. Thank you to all of our donors on the call, and for all of those that made gifts earlier this week for the SCA Giving Day. If you're interested in making a gift and supporting our work, you can visit thesca.org/giving day. And if you have any more questions, my contact information should be up on the screen right now. So please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions or get an answer if I don't know it. So please email me. And then also there's a link to that survey, to a survey. So we're going to be doing these hopefully a couple times a year, but at least once a year. So fill out the survey so we know what it is that you want to hear about, what you want to see more of. We would love your feedback. So I thank you guys for joining us today, and I hope you all have a really good weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for having me. I've had a great time. Thank you so much for joining and meeting everyone. And thank you so much for meeting you, Stephanie. I'm really happy to have you here as our executive director.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.